Hi all, welcome. This is Nizar, co-founder of Sitecore User Group Chennai. Today we have a session on who watch the watchers. It's a privilege to have Jason doing the honest with the session today. He's a software architect and speaker and evangelist, technical evangelist from Sitecore, and wonderful gentleman promoting Sitecore across different user groups. Over to you, Jason. Thanks a lot for joining. Please do the honest.
Oh, and it is an honor to join you for my first time at the Psych Chennai. I apologize that it has been so long for me to become able to come and speak with your group. Yes, my name's Jason, and today I want to talk about something that's kind of near and dear to my heart, which is ethics in software engineering. More specifically, I'm going to dive in a little bit about how we deal with ethics and bias with machine learning systems that are coming about today. So the news right now is all about deep fakes and facial recognition systems, all kinds of really cool things that can be used for some pretty uncool purposes. So what I want to do is have us be able to talk about how. Oh, apologies. Yes. Sorry, was there a question?
You can
No.
proceed, Jason.
Okay, sorry about that. About how we're going to work in this world with all this tech and kind of stay on the right side of history. I should be clear, I'm not a data scientist. I'm not some uber math guy. I'm not playing with TensorFlow and Jupyter on the weekends. That's not who I am. I came from a software engineering career. I did back-end stuff. I did IT. I did, basically, if you name it, I probably have done it. And eventually, I was running teams, doing bigger problems, thinking about things holistically, like continuous improvement, DevOps, things like that. And what I'm seeing right now with the machine learning solutions coming into these deliveries is it's very similar to what I've seen with other new technologies as they've come up over the last 20 years and started gaining mainstream popularity. So I guess ultimately, I'm just a boy standing in front of an industry asking it to please just take the time, just pause, think about what you're doing and what its impact is. And this is not at all an alarmist type of session. It's not what I want to get that out of the way. I'm not, shouting on the corner about how, oh no, the doom is nigh and we're going to have to prepare for some kind of Ragnarok. It's not that type of session. What we're here to talk about today is a situation. It's happening now. It's opening up a lot of ethical discussions, and we need to be prepared to talk about it. We need to be able to bring that into our daily lives. So what is that scenario that's happening? So the first thing, and it happened a while back, is the idea of big data. These massive customer data stores, people learning about users all over the place. And that got combined with a market that is currently obsessed with competing against each other by going faster and faster and faster. We all talk about time to market. That is the most important thing for a marketing team. So then you've got, on the other side, you've got artificial intelligence and deep learning and machine learning, all this really cool tech and a lot of hype around it. And it's kind of adding some fuel on that race. So you've got a scenario where we've got too much data. We've got these cool new innovations that could act on that data and provide insights. So you've got this driving force with new innovations and then a whole bunch of new processes that people just haven't figured out yet. So you get put in this kind of precarious situation. We're moving too fast. We often have only the time to say, hey, can we do this? Not necessarily, should we do this? And that's kind of a problem. So we're going to look at an example of one of these issues. It's an AI personal assistant. So it makes a phone call. Now, I'm going to try to play this through, and we'll see if it comes through the WebEx as well as it does when it's on stage. Not. All right. I am not sure if that audio actually played to anybody on the call. Um, if you didn't hear it, what it is that a personal assistant AI calls into a restaurant, asks about the restaurant hours, and the person on the other end responds with, "Here's our hours." Everything seems very fluid, very human. Now, it could have easily been that the restaurant was also a personal assistant AI responding with the hours. In this example, there were other ones by Google Duplex. Where they had a hairdresser appointment being booked. They showed the ability to handle interruptions, resume the conversation, all very human-like, using ums and ahs. Um, so it was really cool, but the reaction to it was not entirely positive. Um, in general, while it seemed like the technology was really amazing, that the advancements were impressive. I mean, it doesn't sound like a bot. Ultimately, people were reacting like they were horrified by this a little bit. They felt like it was wrong. They could understand that the tech was there, but ultimately they didn't want to be fooled. What they wanted to know is, am I talking to a person or a machine? Don't fool me. Now, since the moment that this demo was released, Google came out and said, yes, our personal assistant is going to self-identify. But the fact of the matter is it doesn't have to. We have gotten to a point with the technology that tech could just keep on fooling people and go out there and sound just like a person and interact with you. And it would be very difficult for you to understand whether or not you were talking to a person or a machine. So the decision to say, we are going to self-identify, that is not a can we do it situation. Of course you can. The question is, should we do that? And that's ultimately the question we want to come back to, is we often, as researchers and people interested in the science of things, we are going to try to solve a problem. We're going to find the way that we can do something. But at some point in the process, somebody has to be asking, should we be doing this? But who's going to ask that question? Who is going to be the one who's going to stand up and watch over all these technological advancements? Who's going to make sure AI and ML and deep learning are all being done ethically? Who's going to be our guard against bias in the system, even unconscious bias? Is it going to be government? They're only going to come down for legal stuff, and often government kind of leaves this to the tech world to handle. So it's not going to be something that we can just rely on legal requirements. There was an article that was done, a paper on neural networks, gang classification. So determining, is a person in a gang? So this neural network would look at attributes and determine, yes, this person is likely to become a member of a gang. And it got presented at a conference, and some of the audience started questioning, well, hey, hold on, what about the ethics of actually classifying people as a gang member? And the computer scientist who was speaking has a PhD, works at Harvard, very prestigious school. Response was, I'm just an engineer. But that doesn't cut it. Didn't cut it with the audience. It doesn't cut it with the rest of us. It's not a cop-out that you can use. You can't just say, I'm just a whatever. We are all in this. We are the ones who are delivering these solutions. There's no tolerance from the society out there for us to abdicate that responsibility away and put that on somebody else's shoulders. The expectation is that we are going to be responsible for it. Now, the ultimate issue with that is that we are not necessarily the ones working on all of the latest AIs. We're not in the biggest firms that are out there. If we even look at just the top companies that are investing in this major research in ML and AI and deep learning around the world, they have the same type of problem of diverse teams that everybody else does. Now, they're primarily based out of North America. They're primarily based out of the West Coast. And even if those teams do their best, they're still going to face a diversity problem. They're not going to see all the problems. And they've recognized this. They are growing out into different regions as fast as they can. But even these top players, big names that everybody knows, are not able to cross everywhere. You'll see a lot of gray up there. There's a whole second half of the world that really doesn't have a lot of representation for these groups. So these top players are having a hard time being completely diverse, being completely representative of all their people who are going to use this software. So that means they're a long way off from removing something like an unconscious bias from how they deliver responsible software. What does that mean for these smaller groups who don't have this kind of backing, who aren't able to go global like this? How do we go about solving that type of problem? Ultimately, this means we're a long way off from unconscious bias not being a problem. And I'm not meaning to be reductionist in ethics here. I'm not trying to bring it down and only talk about bias because that's the only thing that matters. I am focusing in on one part of the ethics here because it happens to impact a lot of what we do. We're in a digital marketing industry. We have customers who are intent on maximizing the capability for us to impact as many people as possible. And they're trying to automate anything and everything they can. So that's going to lead to some undesirable situations. I'm sure many of you who are on this webinar have received the fun email, the dear first name. That's not a very personalized email you get, and you immediately realize this is an automated system that's talking to me. Now, that's not an example of bias, but it's an example of like poor personalization. I want to talk about a little story just to set up an example of like how does an unconscious bias could introduce something into an ML-based digital marketing scenario. So this is the story of a biased algorithm that led to the exclusion of people. So we'll go a long time ago in a magical kingdom of digital marketing. In a land far, far away, there were some people. They visited a website. And they were very happy because they were offered a huge discount on their next purchase. Now, there were some other people. They also visited the website, but they were not receiving that discount. They were just instructed, please go add items to your cart and make your purchase. So what happened here? Well, the algorithm predicted that, based on the historical customer data, these white men, they're going to have a much higher chance of conversion on these high-end items if we provide them a promo. So the algorithm was only scoring those particular individuals with the right score to get a discount. Now, somehow word got out about this. Started traveling via social media throughout the kingdom. And now you've got a public relations nightmare. So how does this happen? How do we get to a situation where a system is excluding people? Well, an algorithm just mathematically looks at the data it's given. It, in and of itself, the math that's doing that, it is not biased. It is leveraging what is given to it. But the solution was biased. Even if the data is completely diverse, how we go about even just selecting features to be preferred, that impacts it. So we have features about our users who influence the decisions made, things like gender or age. This involves a direct bias. But even if you ignore that, that's called blindness, that doesn't always work. Some of those attributes are embedded in other stuff, like our social networks or our education level or where we live. Even our names can influence information about us. So in the story that I just told, that algorithm was learning based on data that had gender and address features. And it calculated higher scores for people who identified as men and who lived in neighborhoods based on the address that were traditionally white neighborhoods. So if you lived in those neighborhoods and you happened to be men, you got to get a discount. So it started looking at individuals based on demographic data, not on how they behaved, not on their bank credit score, not on whether they were even interested in the item. It was only looking at the demographic data. And this type of segmentation and assumptions creates unfair advantages. So now you're probably saying at this point, okay, very nice story. I don't do that. But all this machine learning and artificial intelligence, it's being put into pretty much every digital aspect of our lives. At one point or another, you are going to be delivering a solution that is going to be using something that is making a selection. It is making a decision. And you're going to be asked to deliver an experience that is for your customer. We need to be able to do something about that. We need to be equipped. We have to be ready as solution delivery people to highlight a problem. We need to know what solutions are available to you. So I don't want to just highlight the problems. I want to talk about also what we can do about that. And I think there's three things that we can focus on. One of them is integrity. I think I like to say that this is a nice professional way of being, hey, can we not be jerks? Another way is to do individualization. I truly believe that if we treat people as the people they are and how they act, that we are going to be able to deliver more fair results. And finally, looking at something like diversity, being able to diversify our data and the teams that work on that data. And then for bonus fun, we'll look at some testing of fairness at the end too. So first up, we're going to talk about integrity. How do you go about having a culture of integrity in your organization? And it should be noted that this is not easy. This is a huge problem. You may already have a really great team, but having this type of culture and making a cultural change is not a very small job to take on. And while the culture of integrity sounds kind of like a process improvement consultant came up with it, it is a huge value to an organization. Because at the core, what you and I want to do is know that we're doing the right thing. And we want to know that our colleagues are doing the right thing. And we want to know that management executives are doing the right thing. And the reason I'm saying like right thing in that way is because it's kind of a crux of the problem is what's the right thing to do? There are certain situations where we can probably be fairly certain that something is the wrong thing. Like, I probably would not want to, dig into Tomas's emails, find his personal emails, and then send that to our competitors. That seems kind of creepy and really wrong. But there's other things that are a little more gray area. There's other examples where I'm really not sure what I'm supposed to do. So how do we tackle that? And one way is we need to start learning. We're not the first ones in our organizations to be thinking about, hey, do we have enough of this support? There's lots of groups that have done this. They've made lots of mistakes. They've made lots of successes. So doing research is a great way to go about doing that. And the other thing is this is not just an individual problem. It's going to take the whole organization to shift. And this is not something that's unique to this particular scenario. So I've tried, agile transformations on groups, trying to bring in a culture of continuous improvement or DevOps. I mean, if we just look at DevOps as an example, the concept of DevOps is that we're all culturally one team. We all have to work together. Everybody should be involved, and we should all have a continuous cycle together to deliver a solution end to end. And that's a cultural shift. Everybody's got to adopt that. You have to make everybody in the organization say that this is going to be okay. Everyone's going to be involved. We're all going to get on board. And that's not easy. Agile is the same way. You've got to get everybody in. That otherwise you wind up with like the water scrum falls and things like that, right? So the same idea with integrity. Everybody's got to get involved in it. And that means having a culture where everybody is supportive of each other about thinking about what we're about to do and asking, should something be done? And that's going to have to start at the top, because we all look to our leaders. We look to the people who are above us on how we should act. And if management is cutting corners, doing unethical practices, overworking, employees are going to be tempted to do that because that's what's being rewarded. But if leadership is seen to be deliberate, transparent, is encouraging discussions on ethics or unbiased decision making, well, employees are going to understand that's what's being valued, and they're going to follow suit. So we have to start things at the top. We also need a support system. We need champions. We need a way for people to understand how to go about thinking about this. So we need people who are going to go out there, show examples of like, here's a scenario, here's one way you might think about it, and allow for others to be able to like, oh yeah, I never thought about that way. Codes of conduct are very common in a lot of bigger organizations, and they're often about the rules of what you should and shouldn't do. And you can't really have just regulations. You need to have values in there. How should we behave? Ultimately, it has to be okay to be able to stand up and say, hey, I don't think things are okay here. We need to have a working environment that's a safe space, that you can bring forward a concern and not think about reprisal of some kind, like you might lose status or it might impact your career. You have to feel safe that you could stand up, own a mistake, and not feel like you have to shift the blame over to somebody else, right? We want to be able to be responsible for this. And we need to be comfortable to ask, should we be doing something? And be able to have those discussions. Now, ultimately, we are going to be responsible for what we're building. We can't do the entire organizational change. As I mentioned, everybody's going to have to get in that. But ultimately, we're going to be responsible. And that means that there is a problem adopting it across an organization, is that every individual, if they're going to be part of it, how are they going to adopt it? How are they going to think that this is their problem, that they have to do it? I believe that there are two things that are true about every person that I've ever met. One, they believe they are excellent drivers. Two, they believe they are ethical employees. So they don't think this is their problem. It's really very difficult for someone to recognize that they have a bias. That's what when I'm talking about unconscious bias, it's not that you are a biased person. There are things you don't think about because of who you are. There's a sphere of ideas that you can consume, and each of us has an unconscious bias around how we can think about problems. Now, you might say that so far everything I've said sounds like common sense. Why would we have that at all? And there are a lot of us who have had this professional training in ethics, or we've got lots of experience doing responsible delivery, but there are others who do not. They don't have the experience that we have. So if everybody's going to be involved, we need to be able to provide the solutions and the support for those other people to understand how do they even think about this stuff while they're working on something. If you've been tasked with some bug to fix, how do you even know that this is something you have to pause and think about? So since everybody can influence what the solution is going to be, we need some kind of way for everybody to be supported in that. And that's an organizational change that has to come about. Now, that's a big thing. That's a huge strategic piece to go about a culture of integrity for an entire organization. But there are smaller tactical things you can do too. And this is where I want to talk about treating people as individuals. Ultimately, when I did a webinar on personalization, I was looking at individualization over segmentation. And I was saying, why is it that segmentation is just not good enough anymore? The concept there was that the value of a behavior of a user is going to trump anything over their demographic data, because we're going to cater to each customer for who they are rather than trying to make an assumption about them. There's another issue with demographic data, is that demographic data tends to reinforce an existing bias within our cultures. So there was a case where a job listing ad had an algorithm to just kind of populate, recommended jobs for you. Now, because in the existing culture, men tend to have the high-paying executive jobs. The ads for high-paying executive jobs were only being shown to men. So you're reinforcing and doubling down on an existing issue of balancing and diversity by leveraging the existing demographic data. It's reflecting what is, not necessarily what should be. Even when I was trying to find a picture for this slide, I searched for the word boss in our DAM, and there was 2 images that came up. One that I have no idea why came up, had nothing to do with it, and the other one was an older white man. Ultimately, we've got these existing biases in our data sets, so we can't necessarily trust our existing data about demographics. We have to go and look for behavior. Now, it's all great to say, hey, let's treat people as individuals, as behavior, but how are we going to know what they're doing? And even if we track all of that data, how do we keep it safe? I mean, that's a lot of information you got to track, a lot of it potentially sensitive. So you've got to track it securely, you've got to store it securely, you've got to manage it with privacy in mind. So now you're adding a whole new layer of ethics onto the situation. And you've also got to build the trust with the individual to actually even give you that data and trust you to manage it fairly. Now, if you can get past that and have the data, you're going to deliver better experiences. But you've got to have that mind on privacy. Now, most groups are already used to doing this with demographic data, but they don't know how to do it with behavioral data. Now, we have a unique opportunity here in the Sitecore sphere because we happen to all be used to working with XDB and web tracking, and we've got this kind of security built in. Not everybody has that in all solutions. So if you're working on something that doesn't use something like that, make sure you're thinking about what are those assumptions that I was making because I was using some particular tech that's used to doing it. The other thing I mentioned earlier was that blindness is not a silver bullet. If you just ignore demographic features, that doesn't mean you're suddenly going to be fair all the time. Because there are elements in the user behavior or their current context that might lead you to make an unfair assumption. Ultimately, what I want to get across is that by doing individualization, we're doing better. We're not going to be solving all of the world's problems, but we're going to do better than making assumptions based on segments. The other challenge with going through with individualization, which we need to talk about, is demographic data is really easy. I mean, you can ask for it, the user gives it to you, and then you can use it. Done. But to learn about a user, how they behave over time, where they are currently, that's a lot of data you got to take in. It takes a lot of time. And you can use machine learning to process that data all you want, but it's not going to give you anything relevant until you've got a good set of data first. So this is a challenge of trying to meet someone's need right now versus giving them the right thing, but it might take longer, it might take more data. Now, I want to show an example of why demographic data is so terrible by looking at my own musical catalog. I love music. I also love messing with recommendation algorithms because my music catalog is all over the place. I'm sure you do this too. But we're going to do a little group test here, and you're going to see why demographics are terrible. I'm going to show you a couple of songs. You may not like any of those songs, but I'm going to ask you to choose one of them based on how you feel right now listening to this conversation. First up, we're going to have Thunderstruck by AC/DC, a heavy rocking song. We've also got Fallen by Alicia Keys, much more laid back, R&B style. And we've also got Cleopatra by the Lumineers, which is a great folk song. I want you to think about these three. Right now, which one of those would you pick? If you could only listen to one, which would you put in your playlist? Which would you want recommended to you? And now I'm going to show you some demographics. Now, did you fall into the demographic for that song? Now, I have all three of these songs. I like all of them. I'm not a hipster 25 to 35, unfortunately. But depending on what I'm doing, I'm going to make a different choice. So if it's a hot summer day, I'm out for a drive, going down to the local Tim Hortons, got the windows rolled down. I'm probably blasting some AC/DC, drumming on the steering wheel. But if I'm at home, I'm just relaxing, maybe I'm dancing around, I want some Alicia Keys, that might work. But if I need to pump out a blog or work on a presentation, then the Lumineers gives me that more calm, creative kind of feel to it, right? So the context of what I'm doing is always trumping whatever my particular demographics are. Now, I don't know what the choice was for you. Was it the room you're sitting in? Was it the time of day? Was it how I'm speaking? Was it a particular thing you did during the day today that would influence what your particular choice was? Um, but that is ultimately what we need to learn about users in order to know and give them the right recommendations. Now, the final section I talked about was diversity. And I meant this from both the team and the data, because they both play together at being able to uncover more possible scenarios that we need to think about. And nothing is going to help an organization more than having different viewpoints. There's an analogy, the two heads are better than one. It kind of hints at this, where we all bring our own biases to the table, even the unconscious ones. So even if we try to think our best on behalf of others and how they should be treated, nothing is going to ultimately replace of having collective voices of those different experiences at the table, having a voice in it. There's an example that was, it's not a machine learning one, but it was called the racist soap dispenser. And it got viral, came out of a Facebook office in Africa. Now, if you haven't seen the video, essentially what happens is that the sensors can't detect dark skin. Employees needed to use a white tissue paper under the dispenser to get any soap to wash their hands. Now, if the team had even one single person with darker skin when they were building this and testing this, the issue doesn't happen, right? You don't have this sudden viral thing that goes out there. And it's not like the team who put this together was hatching some plan to take down Facebook from the inside by making it impossible for the employees to wash their hands. I'm pretty sure that's not what they were doing. They were like you, they were like me, trying to hit a deadline, doing what they can. That's how unconscious bias creeps in. Now, there was another example. In most circles, gender, seen as very binary, male or female. And a lot of ML models and algorithms get built entirely around that concept. So they try to predict behavior. Are you a man? Are you a woman? But what happens when a non-binary individual gets scored? It's not like somebody was out there building this thing trying to be mean to that person, right, and ignore their particular desires and needs. It just never occurred to them that that was even an option. But if you have someone who knows about the non-binary gender or is a non-binary individual themselves, they point that out. They go, hey, how would I use this? So you get better data, you get a better model, you get a better solution. And this also helps the business too. Because if you have diverse teams, you're going to have a better story, a better delivery for people in different cultures, different regions. You don't have to stay in just one area. By having a team that has diverse ideas, diverse cultures, diverse histories, diverse geographic locations, you get a better solution that's going to work for more individuals and be able to spread yourself around. The other thing too is that we need to look at diversity as how does it find issues in our process? How do we use diversity to find issues in our data? So there was someone who attended a symposium event who told me a story about how they used an application at a kiosk and it could recommend the track that they should go to. And it refused to acknowledge that she was a developer, classified her instead as a marketer. The model that was behind this system just didn't have the data diversity. It didn't even know that women could be developers. And it wasn't that it was trying to be mean, again, it just did not know. The data wasn't there. So even if we have a team that is building it that is completely diverse, if the data isn't diverse, ultimately we're going to wind up with the same problem. So by using diverse data, we're going to be able to have more coverage. We're going to get more of our audience covered. And you might say, hey, we're going to get right most of the time. But what I want to point out is that you're not necessarily going to hear the times that you got it right. Just like I'm doing today, you're hearing about the times that people got it wrong. That's what spreads. So our focus needs to be on how do we cover our whole audience? How do we improve all of their experiences? How do we reduce the impact to people who are being excluded? And since data diversity is so key, I want to look at an example of just how data impacts the decision. And there's a quick shout out to Angie Jones here. She did a video about explaining machine learning like you're a 5-year-old. And there was an example here that inspired the example here that I'm about to show. On the left, we're going to instruct and classify for the machine that that is an orange. And we can all agree this is an orange. We've also told the machine that this is an apple. We all know that this is an apple. Now the machine knows it's an apple. And we're going to ask the machine, please tell me, what is this? The problem here is that the machine likely thinks it's an orange. Now we know it's an apple, but the machine doesn't have enough data. It has no idea that the important part is the stem or the skin texture. If you look at it, the orange and this new image are much more similar. The shapes are located in a similar position. The backgrounds are more similar. The colors are more similar. The machine has no idea what part of the image is important. It looks much more like the one on the left. For all we know, the only thing the machine learned was that round thing on white background is an orange and round thing on dark background is an apple. And I could have got it to say apple by just changing the background image. If we don't have more data, more diverse data, more different scenarios, classifying it all, the machine can't learn properly. So you need more comparison points. And this is something you need to do in advance, because if I trained it this way, to then untrain it and retrain it to proper data takes a lot more work. So having the teams that are balanced, that can find this type of problem early, that's what we need to get to. Which brings about, how are we going to test this? Now, if you're into really cool math algorithms, you're going to be able to dig into this a lot deeper than I can. So I'm just going to be surfacing up some things to possibly look into. And one thing I want to point out is that I've been talking about bias a lot. And I want to make it sure that we are not trying to remove all bias from a model. You need some kind of bias, otherwise it's not going to do anything. If everything is possibly equal, then nothing will ever be predicted. So what we're trying to remove is unwanted discriminatory bias in a system. One of the ways we can do this is something called association tests. So this is where you run a test and you look at a sensitive attribute. Maybe it's age or gender. And then you analyze what the outcome is. Does the outcome suddenly change unfairly because I changed that particular sensitive property? Now, Cornell University has something called FAIR test that uses an unwanted or associations framework. It's going to check this for you, kind of look for, you select the sensitive attributes and then kind of mathematically evaluates whether the outcome was unfair based on that. A similar type of way is something called a perturbation test, which is where you make a small change. So you instead of changing a sensitive attribute, what you do is you look at a sensitive attribute and you change its value slightly. So for example, it might be age. Let's say you change someone from 29 to 30. If all of a sudden the outcome drastically changes, you know that regardless of whether the outcome was fair or not, you know that the model is very sensitive to it. So now you know that your model is going to be influenced greatly by someone's age, which is not necessarily something what your intent was. You weren't intending the machine to learn that. So now you've got to figure out how do you fix that so it's less sensitive to that particular attribute. And there's a GitHub library with a Python thing for FairML, which does some math around how to measure your dependence on each feature. So if testing and cool math stuff's your thing, then I greatly suggest go and take a look at these, read up on them, and it's a nice way to bring this into kind of your verification process. Now that brings us kind of like to the end of our time that's going to be together here. I want to just close by saying thank you. Thank you for having me here. And I hope that we have a renewed appreciation together of how we're all going to have to be involved in this, how we all have an impact. We are going to be delivering responsible solutions, including machine learning. Try to think, if you can, about these three things. How are you going to help reinforce integrity in your organization? How can you be a part of that? How can you help deliver responsible solutions that are going to work for an individual, regardless of whether their demographics have to be? And how can you go and help your team have more diverse ideas, better data diversity? How do you help reduce unconscious bias? We're all going to be in this together, right? So hopefully the next time that you're working on something, you take the time to stop and think, should we be doing this? So thank you very much. I'd love to get your thoughts on this, how you think about it, and be able to open this up for conversation if we can. And of course, it doesn't have to be on this topic. If you have any other related questions and you've just been dying to ask Jason St. Cyr or something, I'm open.
Thank you, Jason. Any questions? There's kind of a different session, right? First time. So generally we have a code walkthrough and demo sessions, but it's the first time, right? So we clearly explain the concept, what we have to consider while developing the application. It's great.
I'm glad to bring something a little bit different here. I know that we spend a lot of our days worrying about code. and I hope that we can all think about things and get the time to be able to do so.
Okay.
Well, if we don't have any questions right now, obviously my Twitter is open, my LinkedIn is open. Reach out to me. You can send me any questions you have.
Sure, Jason. So Nizar is again here on behalf of SUG Chennai. I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank Jason for this wonderful session. He clearly told we are responsible, means the one who is developing the application is responsible for all the things, and he clearly told how to build with integrity and individualized experience and diversity. Great, Jason. Looking forward to have more session from you. Thanks for your
Yes, and it was an honor for being able to participate today. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. And thank you, folks, for joining. Hope you have enjoyed this session and looking forward to meet you in the next session. Thank you all. Bye.
Bye, all.